A powerful man, but a lonely farmer decides to break the pact and defy tradition with a forbidden love. Watch this story until the end. You'll be surprised by what happens. If you love love stories and romance, subscribe to this channel. Leave your comment. We post videos like this every day. The wind that cut through the Texas countryside that March morning carried more than the red dust from the dry paths. It carried the weight of decisions that mark an entire life, whispers that transform into destiny, and the bitterness of men who confuse tradition with cruelty. Emily woke to the sound of voices in the living room. Not ordinary voices, not the kind discussing rain, crops, or the price of corn at the town market. These were low conspiratorial voices, carrying a seriousness that made the air in the house feel heavier. At 22, she had learned to decipher tones, to read between the lines what adults tried to hide, and in that tone there was something that made her hold her breath. Sitting on the edge of the bed, Emily observed her legs. The same legs. That fever had left weak when she was only 7, that trembled when she tried to stand for too long, that made her walk slowly, always slowly. But they were her legs, and she had learned to live with them, to find strength where others saw only limitation. She managed to stand and walk to the bedroom door, leaning against the wall. The old wood of the house creaked under her bare feet, but she knew every board, every place to step without making noise. It was a skill she had developed over the years, when listening became her form of survival. "There's no other way, Anthony." The voice belonged to her Uncle Gerald, her father's younger brother. "The drought has ruined everything. The corn dried up in the ground, the beans barely sprouted. And Lancaster won't wait any longer." "I know that." The response came in a dry tone in her father's harsh voice. Anthony Smith was a man who spoke little and smiled even less. Emily couldn't remember the last time she had seen him show any tenderness, not even toward her mother, before she died 5 years ago. "So you know he can take the property, everything. The house, what little land we still have, even the pig pen." There was a long silence. Emily pressed her ear closer to the door crack. "He made an offer," her father's voice was different now, lower, almost a whisper. "Said if I hand Emily over to him as a companion, he'll forgive the entire debt." The world seemed to stop. Emily felt the air leave her lungs, as if someone had tightened a rope around her neck. Companion, she knew exactly what that meant. In rural Texas, everyone knew what it meant when a man like Howard Lancaster asked for a woman as a companion. "Anthony," her uncle's voice sounded hesitant. "She's your daughter." "She's dead weight." The reply was quick, cutting like a blade. "She can't work properly in the fields, can't even take care of the house like a woman should. At least this way she's good for something." Emily closed her eyes and leaned against the wall, feeling her legs tremble, not from physical weakness, but from a silent rage that grew inside her like a slow burning fire. She had always known her. Father saw her as a burden, but hearing those words spoken with such coldness was like taking a bullet to the chest. "And if she doesn't want to?" asked her uncle. "She will." Her father's voice was loaded with cruel certainty. "Because if she doesn't, we'll be on the street and she along with us. At least with Lancaster, she'll have a roof and food." Emily went back to the bed, walking as if in a trance. She sat down slowly and looked through the small window that faced the backyard. Outside, the chickens scratched at the dry earth, looking for anything that might serve as food. That was exactly how she felt, like a chicken in the yard, being observed by someone who had already decided her fate. Howard Lancaster. Everyone in the region knew his reputation, a man in his 60s, widowed for a long time, owner of lands that stretched beyond the horizon, rich, powerful, respected out. So of fear. They said no woman who passed through his ranch left the same way she entered. They said many things about him, but always in whispers because no one had the courage to speak loudly. And now she would be handed over to him like a bargaining animal. Emily spent the rest of the day in silence, pretending not to know anything. She helped prepare lunch, swept the porch, fed the chickens. Automatic movements while her mind worked like a corn-grinding machine, trying to find an exit that didn't exist. When night came, her father finally came to talk to her. He entered the room without knocking, as he always did, and stood in front of the bed where she was sitting. "Emily, we need to talk." She looked at him, at that man who had fathered her but never loved her, and decided she wouldn't make things easy. About what, Dad? About your future. He cleared his throat, obviously uncomfortable. Mr. Lancaster made an offer. He wants you to go live on his ranch as a companion. A companion. She repeated the word slowly, savoring all the bitterness it carried. It's a good opportunity, girl. You'll have a better life there. Big house, good food, nice clothes. And what do I have to do in return? Her father looked away. Be pleasant company for him. He's a lonely man, needs someone to use whenever he wants. Emily completed the sentence, and her voice came out firmer than she expected. Don't talk like that. You should be grateful. How many girls in your condition would have a chance like this? Condition. The word hit her like a punch. Her condition. Her weak legs, her difficulty walking, her dependence. All summed up in one word that reduced her to less than a human being. And if I say no, her father finally faced her, and Emily saw in his eyes the coldness of a man who had made his decision long ago. You won't say no. Because if you do, tomorrow we'll all be on the street. Me, you, and everyone else who depends on this property. Is that what you want? She knew he was talking about the 2 employees who still remained on the farm, simple men who had worked for them for years. She knew he was using guilt as a weapon, but even so, the guilt worked. When, she asked, and her voice came out in a whisper. Next Sunday, he'll send someone to get you. 5 days. She had 5 days of freedom. After her father left, Emily lay on the bed and looked at the ceiling. She didn't cry. She had learned long ago that tears changed nothing in the Texas countryside. Instead, she let the anger grow inside her, fed it like stoking a fire because she knew she would need it to survive what was to come. It was on Friday morning that everything changed. Emily was in the yard, trying to draw water from the well, when she heard the sound of horses approaching. She looked toward the road and saw a man mounted on a chestnut horse, coming slowly along the dirt trail. She didn't immediately recognize the rider, but there was something about the way he sat in the saddle, upright and secure, that caught her attention. The man stopped in front of the house and dismounted with precise movements. He was tall, probably around 40, with dark hair and a few gray strands at the temples. He wore a simple shirt and leather pants. But there was something about him that spoke of money, of position. Perhaps it was the way he carried his shoulders, or the way his eyes observed everything around him, with the confidence of someone accustomed to being respected. When he saw her, he slightly inclined his head in a respectful greeting. Good morning. Miss, I'm Victor Morgan. I've come to speak with your father. Victor Morgan. Emily knew the name. Everyone in the region knew it. Prosperous rancher, owner of one of the largest properties in the area, a man who had kept his distance from everyone, since his family died in an accident years ago. He lived like a ghost on his own land, people said. He's inside. Emily pointed to the house door. Dad, there's a visitor. Anthony appeared at the door, and Emily saw the surprise on his face when he recognized the visitor. Victor Morgan wasn't a man who made social visits. Mr. Morgan. What an honor to have you here. Come in, please. I prefer to talk out here, if you don't mind. Victor's voice was deep, controlled. I've come to talk about your daughter. Emily felt her heart race. How did he know? Her father looked visibly uncomfortable. My daughter. I heard you planned to hand her over to Howard Lancaster. The phrase fell like a stone in still water. Her father glanced quickly at Emily, then back at Victor. That's family business, Mr. Morgan. Perhaps it is, but I've come to make a different proposal. Victor took a few steps closer, and Emily could see his eyes up close. They were brown, intense, but there was a deep sadness in them, like an old well. I've heard that your debts to Lancaster amount to about $15,000. Her father swallowed hard. More or less that. I'm willing to pay that amount, all of it. In exchange, your daughter would come work at my ranch. Honest work, with a salary, housing, and all the guarantees the law requires. Emily felt the ground move beneath her feet. It was impossible. Things like this didn't happen in rural Texas. Work doing what? Asked her father, suspicious. I have a large library that needs organizing, ranch papers that need to be filed. It's light work, suitable for someone who prefers activities that don't require much physical exertion. He didn't say someone like her. He didn't mention her limitations. He just found a respectful way to offer work she could do. And what would the salary be? Asked her father. And Emily saw that he was trying to find some catch in the proposal. $2,000 a month plus housing, meals and health insurance. It was more money than Emily could earn anywhere in the region. It was more money than many men earned working in the fields all day. Why? The question left Emily's mouth before she could control herself. Why would you do this for a stranger? Victor looked her directly in the eyes, and for a moment she felt as if he were seeing something inside her that she didn't even know herself. Because everyone deserves to have a choice, miss, and because honest workers are hard to find. Her father remained silent for a long time, clearly calculating the options. $15,000 in cash, without any of the complications that would come with Lancaster's proposal. And if she's not good at the job, then she'll continue receiving the salary until she finds another job. I have enough money to bear the risks. Emily looked at Victor Morgan and wondered what kind of man paid a fortune to give freedom to a stranger. What kind of man risked his own safety by meddling in Howard Lancaster's business? I need an answer by Sunday morning, said Victor, turning back to his horse. If you accept, I'll come for Miss Emily at noon. He mounted his horse with the same elegance with which he had dismounted, nodded his head once more to Emily, and departed, leaving a cloud of dust and a million questions in the air. That night, for the first time in 5 days, Emily managed to sleep. And for the first time in years, she dreamed of a future that wasn't a prison. Sunday arrived with the bluest sky Emily had seen in months, as if even nature wanted to conspire in favor of her freedom. She woke before dawn, packed her few clothes in a cardboard suitcase that had belonged to her mother, and sat on the porch to wait. She didn't want to give her father a chance to change his mind, didn't want to risk that Victor's proposal was just a cruel dream. At 11:30 in the ET morning, the familiar sound of hooves on the dry road made her heart race. Victor was arriving punctually as he had promised. This time he wasn't just on his chestnut horse, but accompanied by an old but well-maintained pickup truck, driven by a middle-aged Hispanic man. Victor dismounted and walked to the porch where Emily was sitting. He wore a simple white shirt and jeans, but there was a natural elegance about him that transformed any clothing into something special. "Good morning, Miss Emily. Are you ready?" She nodded, holding tightly to the handle of her suitcase. Her father appeared at the door, clearly uncomfortable with the whole situation. Victor addressed him with formal courtesy. "Mr. Smith, I've brought the money as agreed." He took an envelope from his shirt pocket. $15,000 as agreed. Her father took the envelope with hands that trembled slightly, whether from relief or some belated remorse Emily couldn't decipher. "Take good care of her," muttered the man, unable to look at his daughter. "You can be sure I will," replied Victor, and there was in his voice a promise that went beyond words. The middle-aged Hispanic man who was driving the truck approached. "This is Mrs. Connie," Victor introduced. "She's worked with me for 15 years. She'll help with anything you need." Connie was a woman of about 50, graying hair tied in a simple bun, kind eyes that lit up when she saw Emily. "Pretty girl," she said, smiling. "You'll like the ranch, that's for sure. It's a peaceful place." Victor helped Emily into the truck, with a care that surprised her. He didn't treat her like an invalid, but simply offered support when she needed it. It was a subtle difference, but it made all the difference in the world. The journey to Morgan Ranch took 40 minutes on dirt roads that wound between hills covered with vegetation. Victor rode alongside the truck, and Emily couldn't stop watching him. There was something hypnotic about the way he rode, as if man and horse were one, an ancient familiar dance that spoke of years of practice and a deep intimacy with that land. "He's a good man," said Connie, noticing Emily's gaze. "Been through a lot, but his heart's in the right place." "What happened to his family?" Connie was silent for a moment, as if deciding how much to reveal. "Car accident 5 years ago. His wife, Mrs. Helen, and the boy, Gabriel. He was only 8. Her voice got lower. "Since then, he's shut himself off from the world." You're the first person he's invited to live at the ranch since they were gone. Emily felt a tightness in her chest. She was beginning to understand why Victor had interfered in her situation. Perhaps he recognized in her forced loss something of the irreversible loss he himself had suffered. When they arrived at the ranch, Emily couldn't hide her amazement. The house was large but not ostentatious, built of stone and wood with a porch that wrapped around the entire front of the building, surrounded by well-tended gardens where colorful flowers mixed with native plants. There was a harmony between the construction and the landscape that spoke of care, of love for the place. "It's beautiful," she whispered, and Victor, who had dismounted and approached the truck, smiled for the first time since she had met him. "Helen designed the gardens," he said, looking at the flowers. "She used to say that a house without a garden is like a person without a soul." Connie helped Emily out of the truck, and Victor picked up her suitcase. "I'll show you your room," he said, "then we can talk about the work." The room was on the second floor of the house, with a large window that gave a view of the fields, where horses grazed freely. The decoration was simple but cozy: an iron bed with a white quilt, a wooden desk by the window, a bookshelf with some books, and an old but well-preserved wardrobe. "The bathroom is all yours," explained Victor, pointing to a side door. "Connie leaves meals ready, but you can eat whenever you want. The library is on the first floor. I'll show you later." He placed the suitcase on the bed and headed for the door, but stopped before leaving. Emily. It was the first time he had spoken her name, and the way the word left his mouth made something stir inside her. "You're safe here. No one will force you to do anything you don't want to. That's a promise." After he left, Emily sat on the edge of the bed and looked out the window. Freedom. So this is what freedom looked like. A room of her own, a beautiful view, the certainty that no one would enter without her permission. She unpacked her few things and went downstairs to see the rest of the house. The living room was spacious, with comfortable sofas and a stone fireplace, but it was the library that really impressed her. Entire walls covered with books from floor to ceiling, a large table in the center, and armchairs scattered around the corners. It smelled of paper and wood, a smell that reminded her of the few happy moments of childhood when the school teacher read stories to the class. "Like it?" Victor appeared at the door, bringing a cup of coffee. "It's amazing." "Have you read all these books?" "Most of them. Reading has always been my refuge." He approached one of the bookshelves. Helen also liked to read. Half of these books are hers. Emily noticed the subtle pain in his voice whenever he mentioned his dead wife. It was a pain that didn't scream, but that was there, constant, like a mark that never completely heals. "The work is simple," he continued, returning to the practical subject. "These papers here," he pointed to several piles on the table, "are ranch documents from the last 10 years. Contracts, invoices, correspondence. I need them organized by year and category. Nothing complicated. Can I start now?" "If you want. But you don't need to rush. The important thing is that you feel comfortable." The first days passed in a tranquil routine that Emily had never experienced. She woke when she wanted, had coffee on the porch, spent the mornings organizing the library papers, and the afternoons reading some of the books that interested her most. Victor appeared from time to see how the work was going, always respectful, always maintaining a polite distance. But there was something in the air between them, a subtle tension that grew with each glance that lingered a little longer. Each moment, when their hands brushed as he handed her a document, Emily began to notice small details: how he always brought coffee for her in the middle of the morning, how his eyes sought her out when he thought she wasn't looking, how his voice became slightly different when he spoke to her. And she herself was changing. For the first time in her life, she felt observed as a woman, not as a limited person or a burden. Victor looked at her in a way that made her discover herself as beautiful, desirable. She began to dress with more care, to choose clothes thinking about how he would react. It was on a Thursday, 2 weeks after her arrival, that the tension finally materialized into something tangible. Emily was in the library, organizing a pile of old contracts when Victor entered with a worried expression. I received a visit today, he said, closing the door behind him. What kind of visit? Lancaster's men. They came to talk with me. Emily felt her blood freeze. What did they want? They wanted to know why I interfered in his business. They said he didn't like my intrusion at all. Victor approached the table where she was working and leaned on the edge, getting closer to her than he had ever been. Did they make any threats? Nothing direct, but the message was clear. He wants me to return you. The word return hit Emily like a slap, as if she were a borrowed object that should be returned to its rightful owner. And what did you tell them? Victor looked her in the eyes, and she saw in them a fierce determination that made her tremble. I said that you're a free woman, an honest worker on my ranch, and that if they came back here without legal reason, I would call the police. That was very risky. Maybe. But it was the right thing to do. They looked at each other in silence, and Emily felt that something fundamental was changing between them. It was no longer just gratitude on her part and generosity on his. It was something deeper, more dangerous. Why did you do that? She asked, her voice coming out almost in a whisper. Why did you risk yourself for me? Victor hesitated, as if he were fighting with himself. Because he began, then stopped, running his hand through his hair. Because when I found out what they were going to do to you, I saw my own pain reflected in your situation. The feeling of having something precious taken by force. I'm not precious. Yes, you are. The answer came quickly, intensely. You're intelligent, strong, beautiful. Any man who can't see that is blind. Emily's heart raced. It was the first time anyone had called her beautiful, and she truly believed it. Victor, I'm sorry. He moved away abruptly. I shouldn't have said that. You're under my protection. It was inappropriate. But Emily stood up from the chair and took a step toward him. What if I wanted you to say it? He looked at her as if she were a ghost. Emily, you don't understand. I'm 24 years older than you. I'm a widower, full of ghosts. You deserve someone young, without a past, who can give you a clean future. What if I don't want a clean future? What if I want a real future with someone who looks at me the way you do? The question hung in the air between them. Victor closed his eyes as if he were in physical pain. You don't know what you're asking for. Yes, I do. I'm asking to be seen, to be desired, to be chosen, not out of obligation or pity, but because someone truly wants me. When Victor opened his eyes, there was an intensity in them that made Emily feel as if the ground were moving beneath her feet. I want you, he said, and his voice came out hoarse. Since the first day I saw you, I've wanted you. But this isn't right. Why, because I'm younger? Because I have physical limitations? Or because you're still married to a dead woman? The last phrase came out harsher than she intended, and she saw Victor recoil as if he had been punched. That was cruel. It was honest. You saved me from Lancaster, but you're keeping me prisoner in another way. You make me feel desired, but you don't touch me. You look at me as if I were the most beautiful thing in the world, but you keep your distance as if I were contagious. Victor was silent for a long time, looking out the window. Helen was the love of my life, he finally said. When she died, I thought I had died with her, and in a way I did die. I spent 5 years as a ghost, merely existing. He turned to her. Until you arrived here. You reminded me that I'm still alive, and that terrifies me. Emily took another step closer. Why does it terrify you? Because if I truly let you into my life, and something happens to you, I won't survive. Not again. The vulnerability in his voice broke something inside Emily. She finally understood that it wasn't rejection that kept her away from him. It was fear, a deep, visceral fear of loving and losing again. Victor. She reached out and touched his face, feeling the rough stubble against her palm. You can't protect yourself from life forever. He closed his eyes and leaned into her touch. I don't know how to do this again. I don't know how to love without fear. Then learn with me. Learn slowly. When he opened his eyes and looked at her, Emily saw the exact moment when something surrendered within him. She saw the moment when he stopped fighting against what he felt, and when he leaned in and kissed her, it was as if the whole world stopped to watch. It was a gentle kiss, hesitant at first, then deeper, carrying months of pent-up tension and a hunger that neither of them had admitted until that moment. When they separated, both were trembling. "There's no going back now," he whispered, pressing, his forehead against hers. "I don't want there to be," she answered. Outside, the Texas wind was blowing stronger, as if it sensed that a storm was forming on the horizon. And maybe it was. Because in rural Texas, when two people decide to love each other against all rules, the whole world conspires to test the strength of that love. But in that moment, in the silent library, surrounded by stories of other loves, other lives, Emily and Victor decided to write their own story, and for the first time in years, both believed it could have a happy ending. The weeks following the first kiss were like living inside a precious and dangerous secret. Victor and Emily developed their own language made of lingering glances, seemingly casual touches that burned the skin, and conversations loaded with subtexts that only they understood. During the day, they kept up appearances. He took care of the ranch business. She organized the library. Connie came and went through the house, preparing meals and taking care of the cleaning, without noticing the electricity that hung in the air whenever the two were in the same environment. Or perhaps she noticed, and with the wisdom of women who have seen much of life, chose to turn a blind eye. But the nights belonged to them. After Connie retreated to her house on the neighboring property, after the last employees finished their chores and left, the big house transformed into a world apart. Victor would come up to the library, where Emily always waited for him with some book in her hands, pretending to read, but actually counting the minutes until she heard him climbing the stairs. They talked about everything and nothing. He told stories about the ranch, the horses, the times when he was young and dreamed of being a veterinarian. She talked about the books she was reading, the discoveries she was making about the world through the pages. Slowly they shed their layers of protection, revealing to each other the fears, the dreams, the wounds they carried. It was on one of these nights, 3 weeks after the first kiss, that Victor brought her a gift. "I found this stored away in Helen's room," he said, handing her a small wooden box. "I thought you might like it." Inside the box was a delicate necklace, a fine silver chain with a small dragonfly pendant, its wings inlaid with small blue stones that glittered in the light of the lamp. "It's beautiful," whispered Emily, touching the pendant with her fingertips. Helen used to say that dragonflies represent transformation, the ability to change, to reinvent oneself. Victor took the necklace from her hands. "May I?" Emily turned, lifting her hair, and felt his trembling hands placing the necklace around her neck. When he finished, his hands remained on her shoulders, and she could feel his warm breath on her neck. "Emily," his voice came out in a hoarse whisper. She turned slowly, still within the circle of his arms, and saw in his eyes an intensity that made her heart race. "I know we should go slow," he said, "but I can't stop thinking about you. I can't stop wanting you." "Then stop trying to stop," she replied, and rose on tiptoe to kiss him. This time the kiss wasn't hesitant. It was hunger and need, months of tension breaking like a dam giving way. His hands got lost in her hair, hers clutched at his shirt, pulling him closer, as if she wanted him to devour her whole. When they separated, both were breathless. "Are you sure?" he asked, and there was a vulnerability in his voice that moved her deeply. "I'm sure about you," she replied. "I'm sure about us." He picked her up with an ease that surprised her, and she remembered that in his arms, her physical limitations simply didn't exist. She was just a woman being carried by the man who desired her. Victor's room was at the end of the corridor, a masculine but welcoming environment, dominated by a large dark wood bed. He set her down beside the bed and looked at her as if he were memorizing every detail of her face. "You're beautiful," he said, tracing the contour of her face with his finger. "So beautiful that sometimes it hurts to look at you." Emily felt tears well up in her eyes. No one had ever made her feel this way, desired, precious, worthy of being loved. What happened that night was more than sex. It was a mutual discovery, a careful and intense exploration of two bodies meeting, two souls recognizing each other. Victor touched her as if she were made of crystal and fire at the same time, with a reverence that made her feel like a goddess. And Emily discovered a facet of herself she didn't know, a sensual, powerful woman, capable of making a man like him tremble with desire. Afterward, lying in the darkness, bodies intertwined, she traced with her fingers the scars on his chest, marks from the accident that had forever changed his life. "You've told me about Helen and Gabriel," she said softly. "But you never told me about the accident." Victor tensed beneath her touch. "It's not a pretty story." "It doesn't have to be pretty. It has to be true." He sighed deeply, pulling her closer. "We were returning from a birthday party in town. Gabriel had eaten too much candy and was feeling sick in the back seat. Helen was driving, I was taking care of the boy." His voice got lower. "It started to rain, the road got slippery. Helen lost control at Devil's Curve. Emily knew that curve. It was dangerous, with a steep drop on one side. The car rolled 3 times before hitting the trees. I woke up in the hospital 3 days later. They had already been buried." "You blame yourself. I should have insisted on driving, or we should have stayed in town until the rain passed. Or," his voice broke, "I should have died with them." "But you didn't. And do you know why?" Emily raised herself to look him in the eyes. "Because you had a life to live. Maybe not the life you planned, but a life nonetheless. And that life brought me to you." Victor kissed her with a desperate tenderness, and she felt in the salty tears on his lips that something inside him was healing. The following days were ones of intense and fragile happiness. They didn't talk about the future, didn't make plans. They lived each moment as if it were a gift stolen from destiny. Victor taught her to ride, holding her firmly in the saddle while the gentlest horse on the ranch took them on slow rides through the fields. She read to him on hot afternoons, her voice transforming the characters in the books into real people who visited them in the library. But happiness in rural Texas always comes accompanied by shadows, and theirs were rapidly approaching. It was Connie who brought the first worrying news. "They've been asking about you in town," she said one morning while serving coffee. "Lancaster's men asking questions about the ranch routine, what time the boss leaves, what time he returns." Victor and Emily exchanged concerned looks. "What kind of questions?" asked Victor. "If the girl leaves the ranch, if she has visitors, if you are together." Connie hesitated. "Mrs. Beatrice, who sells cheese in the square, said that one of them specifically asked if you sleep in the same room." Emily felt her blood freeze. If Lancaster knew about their relationship, that changed everything. It was no longer just a matter of a paid debt or honest work. It was a matter of wounded honor, of challenged power. "There's more," continued Connie, clearly uncomfortable. "Mrs. Sophie, who works in Lancaster's house, said he's been talking about looking for old documents. Something about land disputes from years ago." Victor turned pale. "What documents?" asked Emily. "I don't rightly know, but she said he mentioned your father's name, Mr. Victor. Said he has scores to settle with the Morgan family." After Connie left, Victor remained silent for a long time, looking out the window with a somber expression. "Victor, what are these documents?" He sighed deeply. "A story I thought was buried." He turned to her. 15 years ago, my father and Lancaster's father had a dispute over the boundaries of our properties. It was a water-rich strip of land, very valuable. The matter went to court, and my father won the case. But a week after the decision, Lancaster's father's house caught fire. He died in the fire." Emily felt a shiver run down her spine. "Are you saying that?" "I'm saying it was never proven that it was accidental, and that Lancaster always suspected my father had ordered the house set on fire." "And had he?" Victor looked her in the eyes. "I was 18 at the time. My father told me he hadn't, and I believed him. But now I'm not so sure." The revelation fell between them like a stone in a calm lake. Emily immediately understood the implications. If Lancaster had evidence, even circumstantial, that the Morgan family had caused his father's death, he would have a powerful weapon against Victor. Is there any proof? I don't know. My father burned a lot of papers after old Lancaster's death. He said it was to avoid more problems, but he might have burned evidence. It's possible. Emily approached him and took his hands. Even if it's true that was 15 years ago, you had nothing to do with it. Lancaster doesn't see things that way. For him, the sons pay for the sins of the fathers. That afternoon, while Victor was in the fields taking care of the cattle, Emily received an unexpected visit. Connie appeared in the library with a nervous expression and an elderly woman whom she didn't know. "This is Mrs. Mercy," Connie introduced. "She knew your mother." Mrs. Mercy was a small bent woman, completely white hair tied in a tight bun, eyes still lively despite her advanced age. She carried a cloth bag in her hands. "Child," she said, her voice weak but firm, "I need to talk. To you, it's about your mother, Rose." Emily felt her heart quicken. Her mother had died when she was 17, and there had always been mysteries about her past, things her father refused to discuss. "What about her?" Mrs. Mercy looked at Connie, who nodded encouragingly. "Your mother asked me before she died to keep some things for you, said that one day you would need to know the truth." She opened the bag and took out an old notebook with a worn leather cover. "This is her diary. She wrote everything here, everything about what happened when she was young." Emily took the diary with trembling hands. The cover was worn by time, the pages yellowed. "What happened? Read it, child, but prepare your heart, because the truth sometimes hurts more than lies." After Mrs. Mercy left, Emily was alone in the library with the diary. For a long time she just held it, as if she could absorb its secrets through touch. Finally, she opened to the first page. Her mother's handwriting was delicate, feminine, very different from the hard and silent woman she remembered. "March 15th, 1978. Today I turned 15, and Mama said I'm a woman now. I don't feel like a woman. I feel like a scared girl in a world of men who look at me with eyes I don't understand." Emily slowly turned the pages, following the life of a Rose she had never known. A dreamy girl who liked flowers and wanted to learn to read, who worked in the house of a rich family in the region. And then she came to the entry that would change everything. July 10th, 1979. "I can't tell anyone what happened today. I can't even write properly. My hands are shaking. Too much. He called me to his room when his wife went to town. Said it was time for me to learn how to please a man. I tried to run away, but he's too strong. Too strong. When he finished, he told me that if I told anyone, he would kill my family. And I believe him. Everyone is afraid of Howard Lancaster." The diary slipped from Emily's hands and fell to the floor. Howard Lancaster, the man who had tried to buy her as if she were an object. With her heart pounding in her chest, she picked up the diary again and continued reading. The following entries told a story of horror and silence. Rose had been systematically abused by Lancaster for months until she discovered she was pregnant. December 15th, 1979. "I'm sure now there is a life growing inside me, a life that came from hell. I don't know what to do. If he finds out, he'll kill me. If my parents discover the truth, they'll throw me out of the house. I'm alone in the world with this secret that's killing me inside." Emily had to stop reading. The words blurred through tears, and she felt as if the world were crumbling around her. Her mother had been raped by Lancaster, and she forced herself to continue reading. January 2nd, 1980. "I met Anthony today at the fair. He's young, hard-working, has a small but honest property. When he looks at me, I don't see evil in his eyes. Maybe he can save me." March 20th, 1980. "Anthony asked me to marry him. I said yes, but I didn't tell him about the baby. I'll let him think it's his. It's the only way to survive." August 15th, 1980. "Emily was born today. She's beautiful, perfect, a miracle amid so much horror. Anthony was happy, but I see questions in his eyes. She was born 7 months after the wedding, but she's too big to be premature. He suspects, but he doesn't ask. Not yet. Emily closed the diary and bent over herself, sobbing. Everything made sense now. Her father's coldness, the way he had always looked at her with a mixture of resentment and suspicion. She wasn't his daughter. She was the daughter of the man who had destroyed her mother's life. She was Howard Lancaster's daughter. The man who had tried to buy her as a concubine was her own biological father. When Victor arrived home that night, he found Emily sitting on the library floor, clutching the diary, her eyes red from crying. "Emily, what happened?" She looked up at him, and Victor felt as if he had been punched in the stomach when he saw the raw pain on her face. "I know who my father is," she said, her voice broken. "I know why Anthony always hated me. And I know why Lancaster wanted Sammy so badly." Victor knelt beside her, pulling her into his arms. "Tell me." And she did. She told him about the diary, about the abuse, about the forced pregnancy and the marriage of convenience. She told him about a mother who carried a terrible secret to her death to protect the daughter who was born from the worst moment of her. Thrice when she finished, Victor held her in silence for a long time, his own anger growing like an uncontrolled fire. "Now I understand," he finally said. "I understand why he insisted so much on having you. It wasn't just desire or power. It was ownership. In his sick mind, you belonged to him by right of blood." "I'm the daughter of a monster," whispered Emily. "No." Victor held her face between his hands, forcing her to look at him. "You're the daughter of Rose, a brave woman who survived hell to give you life. What he did doesn't define who you are. But it changes everything, doesn't it? Now he has even more reason to pursue us." Victor kissed her on the forehead, and when he spoke, his voice was loaded with fierce determination. "Then we'll have to be ready to face him." But both knew that the approaching storm would be greater than anything they had ever faced, because now it wasn't just a matter of forbidden love or wounded pride. It was a matter of blood, secrets, and vengeance that came from too far back to be easily resolved. And, in rural Texas, when blood calls to blood, only the strongest survive to tell the story. The 3 days following the discovery of the diary were the tensest that Morgan Ranch had ever witnessed. Victor barely slept, spending the nights walking through the house like a caged animal, checking locks, looking out windows, preparing for a war he knew was coming. Emily, for her part, oscillated between moments of fury and others of a deep sadness that left her mute for hours. The revelation had changed something fundamental between them. Not the love, that remained firm as a rock, but the urgency. Both knew they no longer had the luxury of living day by day pretending that the outside world didn't exist. The truth about her paternity had placed Emily in an even more dangerous position. In Lancaster's hands, that information became a deadly weapon. It was on a Thursday in the late afternoon that the storm finally arrived. Victor was in the corral, treating an injured horse, when Connie came running from the main house, her face pale with terror. Boss, they're coming." Victor dropped the veterinary instruments and turned quickly. "Who's coming?" "Lancaster. I saw his entourage coming up the road. Must be about 10 men with him." Victor's blood froze. 10 men. It wasn't a social visit. It was an invasion. "Where's Emily?" "In the library, as always." "Go to her. Tell her to hide in the attic and only come out when I call." Victor ran toward the house. "And Connie, get the shotgun that's behind the kitchen door. If anything happens to me, you shoot first and ask questions later." Victor reached the library just as Emily was getting up from the chair, having heard the sound of horses approaching. "It's him, isn't it?" she asked, and her voice was surprisingly calm. "It is. But you're going to hide in the attic until this is over." "No." The answer came firm, determined. "I won't hide like a child. This is about me too." "Emily, you don't understand. This man is capable of anything. If he discovers you know the truth, he'll find out anyway. And I'd rather face him, standing than be caught hiding like a rat." Victor looked at her for a moment, seeing in her eyes the same fierce determination that had attracted him from the first day. He knew it would be useless to try to force her. "Then we stay together, whatever happens." He took her hand and led her to the window. Outside, Howard Lancaster's entourage was approaching the main house. Lancaster himself was in front, mounted on a huge black horse, followed by his armed men. He was an imposing man even at 64, tall, broad-shouldered, greying hair combed back, and small, cruel eyes that seemed to calculate the value of everything they saw. "Remember," said Victor, squeezing Emily's hand, "no matter what he says, no matter how he tries to provoke us, we don't give him what he wants. We don't give him the satisfaction of seeing us afraid." "I'm not afraid of him," said Emily, and Victor realized she was speaking the truth. "I'm disgusted, I'm angry, but I'm not afraid." They went downstairs together and to the porch, where they waited for the arrival of the unwanted visitors. Victor positioned himself slightly in front of Emily, not to hide her, but in an instinctive protective gesture. Lancaster dismounted from his horse with the agility of a much younger man and climbed the porch steps with heavy footsteps that made the wood creak. His small, cold eyes fixed first on Victor, then on Emily, and she saw in them a gleam that made her feel nauseous. "Victor Morgan," he said, his deep voice echoing in the quiet afternoon. "It's been a long time since we've seen each other." "Not long enough," replied Victor, his voice cutting like ice. Lancaster laughed, a humorless sound that seemed more like the growl of an animal. "You were always an insolent boy, just like your father." His eyes turned to Emily. "And you, my dear, must be the famous Emily, daughter of Anthony Smith." The way he said daughter of Anthony was loaded with irony, and Emily immediately understood that he knew she had discovered the truth. "What do you want here, Lancaster?" asked Victor. "Why, I've come to fetch what belongs to me." Lancaster took another step toward Emily. "This young lady should have come to my house months ago. You interfered in a legitimate negotiation." "The only legitimate thing here is Emily's right to choose her own life." "Choose?" Lancaster laughed again. "Women don't choose anything, boy, especially when they have obligations to family." His eyes fixed on Emily with an intensity that made her shudder. "Isn't that right, dear? We have so many things to talk about your mother, about family resemblances." Emily felt Victor tense beside her, but she herself took a step forward. "I know who you are," she said, her voice clear, cutting the air like a blade. "I know what you did to my mother, and I know what kind of monster you are." Lancaster's smile widened, showing yellowed teeth. "Ah." So the little girl read. "Mommy's a diary, how touching." He took another step closer. "And what else did you discover, my daughter?" The word daughter left his mouth like poison, and Emily had to fight against the urge to vomit. "I discovered that you're a rapist and a murderer, and that I'd rather die than have a drop of your blood running in my veins." Lancaster's expression changed instantly. The cruel smile disappeared, replaced by an icy coldness. "Be careful with your words, girl. You're not in a position to insult me." "She's on my property," intervened Victor, stepping forward, "and here no one will mistreat her." "Your property?" Lancaster turned to him, his eyes glittering with malice. "Speaking of property, Victor, did you know I found some interesting documents in the town records office? Documents about the fire that killed my father." Victor paled but kept his voice firm. "That was 15 years ago. The case was investigated and archived. Investigated by a sheriff who was in your father's pocket, that's what." Lancaster took an envelope from the inside pocket of his jacket. "But here I have a letter. A letter your father wrote to a certain Joe Small asking him to solve the problem of old Lancaster." Victor felt the ground open beneath his feet. If that letter was real, if it really proved his father's involvement in the fire. "Even if that were true," he said, "I had nothing to do with it." "Oh, but you did, because you benefited from his death. You got the land, the water, everything." Lancaster folded the letter and put it back. "And now you'll pay. Both of you will pay." "What do you want?" asked Emily, tired of the cat-and-mouse game. "I want justice. I want Victor to pay for his father's crimes. And I want you, my dear daughter, where you should have always been, by my side." "That will never happen." "Yes, it will. Because if it doesn't, I'll hand this letter over to the federal police. Victor will be arrested as an accomplice to murder, and you, dear, will be alone in the world with no one to protect you." It was a perfect trap. Lancaster had carefully prepared everything, using the past as a weapon to destroy their present. But it was at this moment that Emily did something that surprised everyone, including herself. She laughed loudly, a crystalline sound that echoed across the porch like a bell. "You think you can still scare me?" she said, walking until she was very close to Lancaster. "You think after having lived 22 years as a rejected invalid, after discovering I'm the daughter of a rapist, I'm still afraid of being alone in the world?" Lancaster frowned, clearly uncomfortable with her reaction. "You don't understand the situation." "I understand perfectly. You're an old, bitter man who could never get over the fact that my mother preferred to live in a pigsty with Anthony Smith rather than continue being raped by you." Emily felt a strength she didn't know she possessed growing inside her. "And now you want to take revenge on two people who managed to find real love, something you'll never know. Stop talking." "I won't stop. Do you know why my mother chose to have this baby? Why she didn't get rid of me when she discovered the pregnancy?" Emily was inspired now, the words coming like a torrent. "Because she said in the diary that, even coming from you, I was still a chance for something good to be born from something bad. And she was right." Lancaster raised his hand as if to slap her, but Victor placed himself between them in a split second. "Touch her, and I'll break." "Your arm," he said, his voice low and dangerous. "You two are fools," growled Lancaster. "You think love is enough to defeat power. I can destroy you with one phone call." "Can you really?" A new voice joined the conversation. Everyone turned to see a young man climbing the porch steps. He was dressed in a suit, carried a leather briefcase, and had the confident air of someone who knew exactly what he was doing. "Who are you?" asked Lancaster. "Ryan Mitchell, attorney at law." The man addressed Victor. "Mr. Morgan, I managed to arrive in time." Victor looked confused. "I don't understand." "Connie called me yesterday, telling me about the threats. I spent the night investigating." Ryan opened the briefcase and took out some documents, and I discovered some very interesting things about Mr. Howard Lancaster. Lancaster took a step back, for the first time looking unsure. "This conversation has nothing to do with you, boy." "Yes, it does, because I represent Miss Emily, and I have here a copy of the real DNA test done on Rose Smith in 1980, Ryan showed a paper, a test that categorically proves that Emily is not Howard Lancaster's daughter. The silence that followed was deafening. Emily felt her legs weaken. "What do you mean?" she whispered. "Rose had this test done in secret at a clinic in Austin when she discovered the pregnancy. She wanted to be sure who the father was." Ryan smiled. "It turns out she had been involved with Anthony Smith 2 weeks before Lancaster's attack. The test proves that Anthony is your biological father." Emily had to lean on Victor to keep from falling. Everything she had believed about herself in the last few weeks was a lie. "But the diary," she stammered. "Rose never told the whole truth in the diary. Probably to protect Anthony. In case the diary was discovered, she let people believe you were the daughter of rape. To keep you safe." Lancaster was livid with rage. "That's impossible. That woman belonged to me." "And here we have the second revelation." Ryan took out another document. "I have here statements from 3 women who were abused by Howard Lancaster over the years. Detailed statements with dates, locations, and witnesses." "That's false." "And finally," Ryan smiled coldly, "I have a very interesting recording. Her conversation between Mr. Lancaster and one of his men made last night, where he confesses to having forged the letter about the fire." Ryan pressed play on a small recorder. Lancaster's voice came out clearly. "I made up this story about the letter to scare Victor. Old Morgan had nothing to do with the fire. It really was an accident. But it's a good way to pressure him." Lancaster looked around like a cornered animal. His men had begun to move away, realizing that the situation had changed drastically. "How did you get that?" asked Victor. "Connie knows people in town, and those people were tired of living in fear." Ryan put away the documents. "Mr. Lancaster, you have 2 options. You can return to your ranch and never bother these people again, or you can be arrested. Right now for extortion, forgery of documents, and multiple cases of rape." Lancaster looked at Emily one last time, and she saw in his eyes that the power he had exercised over people for decades had finally come to an end. "This isn't over," he growled. "Yes, it is," said Emily, stepping forward. "Because I'm not your daughter. I was never your property, and I'll never be afraid of you again." Lancaster descended the steps heavily, mounted his horse, and departed with his men, leaving a cloud of dust and the end of an era. After they were gone, Ryan said, "Goodbye," promising to keep an eye on the legal situation. Victor and Emily were left alone on the porch, still processing everything that had happened. "So you really are Anthony's daughter," Victor finally said. "I am, and you're not the son of a murderer. And we are free." Emily turned to him, her eyes shining. "We are free." The kiss that followed was different from all the others. It didn't have the desperate urgency of stolen kisses, nor the hesitation of the first encounters. It was a kiss of celebration, of promise, of two people who had passed through fire and emerged whole. 6 months later, Emily was standing on the porch of the same house, but now wearing a simple white dress and the dragonfly necklace that Victor had given her. In her hands, she held a small bouquet of wildflowers that she had picked herself from the garden that Helen had planted years before. Victor was at her side, elegant in a light-colored suit, his eyes shining with happiness. In front of them, a justice of the peace smiled as he read the wedding vows. Connie cried with emotion on the first improvised bench, and even Anthony Smith was present, having finally understood that true love is too rare to be wasted. Twenma. The justice declared them husband and wife. Victor kissed Emily under the blue Texas sky, and she felt that she was finally in the place where she was always meant to be. That night, lying in the bed they now officially shared, Victor traced the contours of his wife's face with his fingers. "Do you regret anything?" he asked. "Like what?" "Like choosing a complicated life with me instead of a simple life with someone else." Emily laughed, the sound filling the room like music. "Victor Morgan, you gave me the first real choice of my life, and all the choices that followed were mine too. I don't regret any of them. Not even falling in love with a grumpy widower 20 years older. Especially not falling in love with a grumpy widower 20 years older who looks at me as if I were the most precious thing in the world." Victor pulled her closer, kissing her forehead. "That's because you are." Outside, the Texas wind blew gently through the trees, carrying with it the stories of love that defy the impossible, that grow in arid soil and flourish against all odds. It carried the story of a woman who discovered her strength when she was finally seen as she deserved, and of a man who learned that the heart can love more than once, in different ways, but equally deeply. And in the silence of the night, two souls who had found in each other their own redemption slept embraced, knowing that, regardless of the storms the future might bring, they would face everything, together. Because in rural Texas, when two people decide to truly love each other, neither God nor the devil can separate them. And this story, which began with a woman being handed over as debt payment, ended with the same woman freely choosing the man who taught her that true love doesn't possess, doesn't control, doesn't diminish. True love liberates, and Emily and Victor were finally completely free.